Big 12 play soon to be underway, and time for Oklahoma to fix some problems and kick it into gear. Welcome to our weekly Oklahoma show, courtesy Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. We hope that you join Jason after every Sooners game right here, the Voice of College Football on our Oklahoma channel. And of course, we're here with you each and every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time to talk Oklahoma football. Hey, Jason, how we doing today?
Doing good, Mark. How about yourself?
I'm good. This should be an interesting show considering what's happened the first 3 weeks of the season, and specifically against the Huskers on a Saturday. A game that, I caught some of your post game. I was in and out, try to check in on everybody's post game on Saturday, and there's quite a slew of them, with 16 or 17, but try to catch a slice of everyone. And it wasn't necessarily a game that went down to the wire. Nebraska didn't threaten that final series. Oklahoma put a stop to it, 3-and-out, game over. But still, a one-score game is a one-score game. And if something happens in regards to a turnover, somebody breaks out into the open field, it can suddenly be a tie game or a losing situation. And so you always have to take a one-score game seriously. And So Oklahoma they weren't, challenged down into the red zone at the final gun. But, how did you feel in regards to, there are one-score games that are, of course, nip and tuck. There are one-score games that are more like, okay, something bad could happen here. But I feel as though we generally have control of the game.
Yeah, it's hard to judge, Mark. I mean, I think, given the fact that Oklahoma's defensive line played as well as they did Saturday, with the amount of time that Nebraska had with the ball there, to your point that you made, they didn't have a whole lot of time. So I felt pretty, you felt pretty good about Oklahoma's chances at that point. But I think, so I don't think, I agree with you, even though it was a one-score game. I didn't feel like Nebraska would be able to drive the length of the field. And I believe there was maybe less than a minute with no timeouts left remaining at that point for Nebraska. But yeah, so I agree with you. I don't think I didn't feel like Nebraska probably would be able to stretch the field. Not stretch the field, drive the field for that time. But still, I think, really for Oklahoma in this game, Mark, I think the word that still reigns supreme is consistency, and really lack thereof. I think offensively, it's, when you look at this Oklahoma team, they've had two halves, so a complete game between the second half of the Tulane game and the first half of the Nebraska game, where Oklahoma's put up a grand total of 10 points for an entire game, and that's just not anything anyone around here is accustomed to seeing with Lincoln Riley's offense. And they've got some things that they really desperately need to work out in a hurry. I think on a good note, when you look at the defensive side, again, it's very it's very different that Oklahoma's, you hold Nebraska, even, Nebraska's not the best offense they're going to face, and maybe not necessarily the one of the better offenses in the Power 5, but still, you hold a team like that to 16 points, 9 points until late in the game, you feel pretty good about your chances to win the game comfortably. However, we're sitting here talking about a game that was, even though maybe it wasn't as close, or as Oklahoma wasn't threatened from losing the game, still you give up 16 points with as good as Oklahoma's offense is. You would certainly expect them to play a little bit better and have a more comfortable win.
Got Jason Ray on the line, as we always do. He makes the show go. Our Oklahoma weekly live show with all of you. Bring your comments, your questions here as we talk Oklahoma football for the next 45 or 50 minutes. And join Jason after the game on Saturday as Oklahoma tees it up for the Big 12 for the first time against West Virginia coming up. Spencer Rattler, of course, Jason, is one of the focuses of the ire of Oklahoma fans because the offense not producing to what the standard is. I believe I heard a statistic that the 23 points scored on Saturday was the least in about 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah, no, that's right. You're absolutely right. And sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
You know, they just scored. They went right down. They looked very efficient on that first drive. I think it was 7 or 8 plays, 75 yards right down the field. Then that was it for the first half. Mm-hmm. And what seems to be, are there other contributing factors? There typically are more than just one player. So your assessment of Rattler's play, your assessment of the entire offense and how much they're helping him or not helping him.
Yeah, so first let's kind of start with Rattler, and I think again very consistent with the terms and the talk that I had is really just inconsistent. I think there's times where he's forcing the ball in the coverage early in the game. There was a couple of situations where he tried to fit the ball in to Mario Williams a couple of times and he was triple covered. So I think you see that, and I think there's times where he's not being aggressive enough down the field. There was a couple of shots where Mike Woods was wide open down the sideline a couple of times, and he missed him. So I think that's happening. I think he's a little bit gun shy. The protection's probably not, and we'll get into the offensive line, but maybe at times is not where it needs to be from his perspective. So I think it's just inconsistent play. He's missing. I think he's predetermining where he's going with the ball a lot earlier than he has been in the past, and not sure what's going on with that. Why he's not looking third, fourth, fifth guy, a guy that's as experienced. I know only 2 years. You don't really say that, but a guy that's started an entire year last year and then his third game this year, you expect him in a Lincoln Riley offense to be in a position where they could, that he's looking off that third and fourth guy and going through the progressions quite quickly. And like I said, that's just not happening consistently. So I think those are the challenges that Oklahoma's facing right now from a quarterback play perspective. I think it's going to be interesting to see. There's a lot of people, again, this is, I think a lot of times a good thing that the fan base is not and the coaching staff, obviously. But there's a lot of people, and I was one, I wouldn't have been shocked to see towards the end of the first half if Riley did something similar to what he did against Texas last year and really just set Rattler down and let Caleb Williams play a series or two late in the second quarter just to get him some different perspective there. So, however, if they struggle again against West Virginia on Saturday and they're down 10 and he's throwing a couple of interceptions and it's the same thing, then I think it might get interesting to see when does Riley feel like that he needs to pull a trigger like that. And I'm not saying it should happen. I'm just saying it's going to be something to consider. So that's one part of it. I think the offensive line has been a little inconsistent. Andrew Rame played quite a bit at the center position for Oklahoma on Saturday, specifically in the second half. He got better as the game went on, but he was pretty bad early on. And then the running back protection, both Kennedy Brooks and Eric Gray was pretty bad on occasions that made Rattler flush out a little bit. So I think that's a little bit of the gun shyness, so to speak, that he's got. So yeah, I think those are the two, contributing factors that we're seeing in Oklahoma struggling a little bit more on offense than they have in the past.
Talking Oklahoma football, of course, with all of you. Please bring your comments, your questions, leave them there in the live chat, and we will tackle them. We got Travis Kenobi stopping by for the final 15 to 20 minutes of the show to talk the West Virginia game and set up the matchups against the Mountaineers, who come in at 2-1, lost to Maryland in a tight game week 1, blew up somebody of not too much consequence, like 66-0.
Yeah.
in game 2. I remember that score. I don't remember who they played. And then this past weekend, another Power 5. So they loaded up pretty well in the non-conference schedule against 2 quality opponents in Maryland on the road, took on Virginia Tech at home and survived that game. Big lead early, held on 27-21 with a defensive stand inside the 5 at the end of the game. Jason, coming out of the Nebraska game in particular, 23-16 win, aside from what we've covered, what do you think is significant, whether from a positive or negative standpoint, about where this football team stands compared to what you thought they would be?
So, obviously we've discussed the offensive side of the ball, and I think where they're at and where their struggles have been. I mean, Marvin Mims has been a little bit of a struggle early, or a little bit of a disappointment early on. Only had 1 catch against Nebraska, I believe. Only 1 catch against Western Carolina as well. Had the 100-yard game in the first game of the year, but I think he's struggling with some physicalness. I think Nebraska had a lot of, they were very physical with him at the line of scrimmage from a cornerback perspective, and he didn't handle that really well. So I think that's something that, I don't think Oklahoma fans expected him to struggle as much as he has thus far. So on the positive, I know that we've been, fairly negative in just some of our commentary here. But from a positive perspective, I think that the defensive line has showed that it is as good as advertised early on in the season. We talked a little bit about that being the strength of the team, and I think it's shown to be that through 3 games. They were very, very dominant against Nebraska, had 5 sacks. They very easily could have had about 8 or 9, if not for Martinez's, his elusiveness in the pocket. So, and then the 2 games where Oklahoma, against Tulane and Nebraska here have had an opportunity to potentially lose the game. They completely dominated the line of scrimmage in that final, in that final possession in both games. So I think that's been a plus. I think that they've clearly, for me, I think are the best individual unit that this team has at this point in the season. And I think maybe until the offense kind of gets it together and kind of finds their groove, because they will at some point. They've got too much talent not to. But before they do, this Oklahoma defensive line, I think, is going to have to continue to dominate and continue to give Oklahoma's offense an opportunity to win these games and play at a high level. So I think those are the 2 things. The secondary has been a little, again, inconsistent, but they're making better plays or tackling a little bit better in the back end as well. So those are kind of some of the things, Mark, that immediately comes to mind in terms of some of the the areas that we've seen good play out of Oklahoma so far this year.
We are here every Wednesday at 11:30 Central Time, 12:30 Eastern, and this is pretty typical. This is of every live stream that I do, whether it be a call-in show or a team-specific live stream, where it takes everybody 15, 20, 30 minutes to get in here. So just want to remind you that we're here every Wednesday at 11:30 Central Time. So make it from the start. Do your best to get in here from the beginning, because we typically have the largest crowd when we're signing off at the end, and then you got to watch the replay and not be able to get your comments and questions in. So we do have a couple coming in here. So we appreciate Lewis being here, and Biggie, and Web Security. So Web Security is looking at this point spread at 16.5, says it feels a bit high. The thing that I'll say about point spreads is that Vegas doesn't overreact as much as the rest of us do. As much of college football nation does from week to week on teams' results and performance. Vegas, they go by the numbers. They also go by what they believe public opinion is. And they also will take some time to move off of a team or move on to a team. They are pretty stubborn with their projection of how good a team is. So they're not going to just respond to, okay, Tulane took it within a 5-point game against Oklahoma, so Oklahoma's not, so we're going to swing our point spreads. And they've been fairly successful at doing what they do to make it difficult on the rest of us if we care to put down $1 or $2 on a game. So they know what they're doing. There's two big reasons why they've got all the fancy hotels and pump hundreds of millions of dollars into that city. Well, there's a zillion reasons, but the two that I'll bring up in regards to the betting angle is, number one, they crunch the numbers better than everyone. So they're ahead of everyone when it comes to crunching numbers and knowing where that line should be. And number two, just flat out, it's rigged to the extent of all they want is betting to be at least even on, as long as it's even. Sure, if they get everyone to bet on the losing side, they're going to make out. But as long as they get even betting on both sides, they take their 10% and they're fine with that. They pay out just as much as they lose, but they take the 10%. If you follow me on the point spreads, you make about 91% on a wager, meaning if you put $100 on Oklahoma to cover 16.5 points and you lose, well, you just lost $100. If you win about 90 or 91 bucks. So they take their 10% cut and they're good with that. And so, 16.5, based on the way Oklahoma's performed, it seems pretty healthy, but they're at home, and it could be a pretty entertaining, close game, and Oklahoma still wins the game, 45-28, because they break free in the last 7-8 minutes of the game. So those are my thoughts about the point spreads.
Yeah, and I was just looking this up as we were talking, Mark. I think when the line initially opened, I'm trying to see if I can find it here, but it looked. I think I had saw that Oklahoma was initially like 18.5 point favorite, maybe even 19. So it has, to this point, I think it's went down. When you see a 2-point difference in the line from Sunday afternoon, Sunday evening to here Wednesday midday, I think that's pretty significant, right?
Yeah.
A lot of money is going to West Virginia. So, yeah, I mean, I would agree with the consensus here. I think you're the same as some. It looks like that's a little bit of a big line, especially with the way West Virginia plays. And don't want to steal any of the thunder from Travis, but they play. They want to run the ball, a very, very much a ball control offense dominated team, and that was how Nebraska played last week against Oklahoma, limited the number of possessions. So very much would very much assume that that's really the same thing that we're going to see this week against West Virginia, against Oklahoma as well. But yeah, I would tend right now, kind of looking at the game, thinking that that's 16.5 might be a little much right now.
Yeah, every time I see a spread like that, and then get the information that you just laid out in regards to that coming down, it always makes me reconsider my predictions and thinking that I wish I would have grabbed that line. I haven't put $1 on a game in quite some time, but just in regards to my prediction record, which you can catch on Patreon, Jason and myself and 20 other media members with our predictions each week on Patreon. Just search MarkRogersTV there. But those lines usually work against me. So on one hand, I'm thinking, okay, well, that is justifying my thoughts on the game, that the line's moving against me. But at the same time, it's moving against me. And the odds say that you lose several games a year if the line is moved against you throughout the week and you're predicting the game or betting the game late in the week. So again, the betting public high on West Virginia, and we'll probably see it settle in about where it is. I wouldn't expect that it would continue to move in that direction. Vegas will find its sweet spot here the next day or so.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right. Had a question coming in regarding, from Biggie. Is Lincoln Riley just not opening up the playbook? A lot of things we really haven't seen this season formation-wise.
I've heard, Mark, I've seen and heard a lot of commentary related to not opening up the playbook. And I know that was something, and well, let me take that back. I've always heard that has been, whether it's Oklahoma or across the country, when you have a couple of opponents early on that you believe that you're going to, win the game fairly comfortable. And Oklahoma specifically has many years have saved stuff for Texas, for example. Because obviously that was the biggest game kind of mid-year. But it's hard for me to believe that would be the case, Mark, given the fact that they've struggled and been in close games in two of these three games. However, I mean, I guess it could be true if they're holding back. He's Riley's playing a very risky game. I would think at this point, if you're in these one possession games, you're at a point where you feel like that you possibly could have lost either one of those games, and you're still holding things back. I think that's concerning. But if they are, then great. Yeah, if they're holding things back, then I guess great. At this point, this would be the Big 12 play starts. But this would be the time to the time to let it loose. I do know one thing. We've talked, Mark, me and you talked about this when we talked about the injuries and the kind of the lack of depth at the running back room. Would Riley change the way he calls plays? Would he change some of his formations? Typically, you see Oklahoma in a lot of two-back sets. I don't think they haven't had Kennedy Brooks and Eric Gray in there at the same time in terms of a two-back set at all. Not even one single play this year. So I think that will be something that's interesting to watch. The remainder of the year. Does he get them back into a two-back set offense at any point throughout the year, or is he just kind of too scared, or too maybe scared is not the word, but too worried about possibly getting one of those kids injured? I think that will be something, a big key to kind of look at throughout the remainder of the year.
This would take exhaustive work. So on one hand, I'm not surprised that it hasn't been done. On the other hand, I would think with all the advanced metrics that this would be a statistic that we would see. I've never thought of it before up until this question from Biggie about the playbook, that somebody would look at a team, any team in the country, and chart the number of plays that they run over the course of a season. So they'd watch the entire 2020 season, let's say, and if Oklahoma ran play X, the first play of the first game, and then they ran that play, the second play of the game, that would be one play. So they would chart all the different formations and plays run from those formations to see how varied that offense is. How many different plays are in the playbook, and then make some kind of calculation as to what are the successes of various plays and various formations and lack of success in other plays and formations. And then you could compare, okay, well, through 3 games last year, Oklahoma ran 87 different type of plays, and this year they've only run 49. So they must be limiting the playbook. Now, I know that's exhaustive, but with all the advanced metrics that people are doing these days in sports and in college football in particular, I would think that somebody would come up with some kind of statistic like that.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think there's a comment here that Riley does this quite often. And I don't know, Mark. I mean, for me, you've got a lot of film on Oklahoma over the last 4 or 5 years. I don't know what value there is in holding and holding plays back. I mean, granted, if you've got some different variations of plays that you've ran in the past, and you get to a point where you don't want to show that's something that's brand new, then I can completely be on board with that. Having said that, if you have plays in your playbook that you have ran, fairly consistently over the last 4 or 5 years with Riley at Oklahoma, I don't understand why you would hold those back. to me. I mean, you would at the very least you would want to play, with a full deck early on. But Riley has forgotten more about football and running offense than I'll ever know. So I will certainly trust him. I mean, and I don't think about this from a trick play perspective. I'm just saying different variations of formations that they have. So yeah, I mean, to your point, Mark, I think it would be very interesting to see exactly any kind of time and motion study just to see exactly what that would look like.
I do think that is one of the more overrated criticisms that fan bases have of football teams is play calling. Number one, because of our lack of knowledge of football, even if we play to a certain level, even if we watch a zillion hours of it, the level of understanding is limited by any of us. And I consider myself as a fan / analyst about as educated as anyone, again, that is what I consider a non-football, hardcore football person, scout, coach. I can't approach that type of level of X's and O's by any stretch. Now, when it comes to game management, clock management, I do think that the general public and people that really watch football, if they're really into that side of the strategy and the coaching role, there's more room for not necessarily criticism, but to have knowledge of, because it's less about the football exactly, and it's about situations and understanding time and the ramifications of timeouts and field position and downs and all those sorts of things that play into it. But when it comes to play calling, I rarely, not that I don't do it a couple times a season, question a play call. Because it seems as though if the play call works, then it was a good play call. If it doesn't, and that doesn't mean that there aren't bad play calls, because there are, even beyond the ones that I criticize, that a football coach or scout would say, this is why X, Y, and Z, this was a poor play call in this situation. So it does exist, but from the fan base criticism of particular teams, I think that's one of the more ridiculous criticisms of these teams is the play calling. Jimmy's stepping in here in the live chat, and I've got to admit here, Jason, that based on I believe what was a 5-star high school recruiting ranking, and then his playing time at Tennessee, I expected Wanye Morris. That was one of the more heralded transfer portal acquisitions in college football during the offseason, that I expected him, just based on reputation and what I knew about his playing time at Tennessee, to plug in and be a factor on this Oklahoma offensive line.
I really did too, Mark. I'm, frankly with you, a little bit surprised that he hasn't, at least, even if he hasn't started, by this time, I was a little bit surprised getting a lot of playing time. But he honestly, he hasn't, for whatever reason. After the Tulane game, Lincoln Riley talked about him and saying that he's practicing a lot better. He's knows his assignments a little bit better. And then he played a little bit more against Western Carolina. There was a couple of times where he looked a little lost, but I think by and large he looked like he played well. I don't know that he actually saw the field against Nebraska. And it is true that offensive line coach Bill Bedenbaugh, he doesn't like to substitute a lot during the games. He likes his 5, and they play almost the entire game. So Robert Conjal started the game, played about 30 or 40 snaps, and then Andrew Rame came in towards the end of the second quarter, then specifically played most of the second half. But the tackles, I didn't see any substitution hardly at all. So Mark, I don't know. It's a bit of a question mark in my mind, specifically after Riley talked about how well that he was coming along. And I know he had a couple of injuries and things that hampered him during fall camp a little bit. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm a little bit surprised that he hasn't either kind of taken that job at the right tackle spot, or even gotten to the mix in terms of some playing time.
Want to remind everyone that we're here with your help and support. Please consider the live chat. Also, you can hit us up at Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App. Just search Mark Rogers TV. If you understand the filtering process at YouTube, that might be another option for you. Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App. Just search Mark Rogers TV, or again, the super chat right here. Join Jason after the ball game on Saturday night. West Virginia, Oklahoma. Right after the game, Jason jumps on to answer your comments and questions with post game. And you can certainly go back to his analysis of the Nebraska game that's posted right here on the channel. All right. Got a question coming in from, I won't even attempt to, what do we got? North Carolina Tar Heel. Okay. If the rumor of Jalen Redmond having a torn meniscus is true, how will that impact Oklahoma's defensive line going forward?
Yeah, so admittedly, I saw this comment ahead of time and I hadn't heard a whole lot. So yeah, there's some stuff that's come out this morning that he has torn meniscus and he will be out for about 6 weeks. So first and foremost, just feel bad for the kid. Very much Caleb Kelly-like in terms of injuries. He's had a lot of injuries in his career at Oklahoma and has played really well. Had a sack on Saturday against Nebraska. So I think from that perspective, Oklahoma is much more equipped to be able to handle a loss on the defensive line than a lot of other positions, on the team. So I think, granted, Jalen Redmond has been a starter, so I don't want to make any light out of this whatsoever in terms of the production that he's had. But I think they've got a lot of guys that they feel comfortable with plugging and playing into that position. So not incredibly concerned with that, especially given the fact that maybe it looks like he'll be back through the latter half of the year for Oklahoma in the stretch run. I think, just in terms of injuries overall, I think they're starting to mount up a little bit on the defensive side. They're getting a couple of kids back, I believe. So you got Billy Bowman, who was out with this game with a hamstring pull. Riley had even said on Monday that Monday that he looks like he'll be back this week. So Woody Washington, however, it looks like he's got a deep thigh bruise. It's going to keep him out for a significant amount of time. Not sure what that, the amount of time that looks like. Danny Stutzman as well. He was out. Riley had talked again, I think this was earlier today, said that he's really, really close to being able to play. So I don't know if he'll be able to kind of suit up against West Virginia, but I would expect him at the least to be back against Kansas State next week. Which is, I think, big, Mark, because there was a lot. He's played really well as a freshman, and the linebacking unit hasn't played as well. So listening to a lot of people and thought that if he was healthy, he probably starts this game against Nebraska, and whenever he comes back, he's probably the starter there in the middle for Oklahoma.
Lewis, thank you so much for encouraging everyone to hit the like button and share these videos out on social media, because if you enjoy the content, then other Oklahoma, Big 12, and college football fans will as well. So just share the videos out on social media and let people know that we're here every Wednesday with Jason. Jason and I, Oklahoma football talk every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Jack is so adamant about Billy Bowman coming back to the defense that he posted this question 3 times. Y'all think Bowman coming back with will change this defense, need more athleticism and aggressiveness on the perimeter?
I do think so. Oklahoma struggled. They moved Delaren Turner-Yell over there to the nickel spot a little bit on Saturday, and then so I definitely think they missed his exactly his athleticism, his strength, and everything he's brought to the table and through the first game. Obviously, I know it was just one game, but for true freshman, he played pretty well. So I think having him really kind of solidify that back end of the defense for Oklahoma is going to be big if he is indeed healthy and able to play Saturday against West Virginia.
Web security, more of a national question here. Do you remember a recent season where all 5 Power 5 conferences seem somewhat up for grabs? So here's my viewpoint on this. First of all, we've only played 9 conference games. So the Big Ten has played more conference games to date than anybody else. They mixed those into the early weeks of the season a little bit more, and very prominent games: Penn State, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Minnesota, and a few others. Uh, so there's a little bit to go on the Big Ten. So let's take into consideration that Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma, they could hit conference play, and then things could revert to what has been the norm for the last 6 or 7 years. It's possible. Doesn't look like it. It does look like they may have some mayhem and chaos. I look at the Big Ten, and I think there's more indication there about there being challenges to Ohio State than there are to Clemson, despite almost losing to Georgia Tech, having to have a 4th down goal line stand to preserve that game, and Oklahoma, because I just think there's a thick layer of teams in the Big Ten: Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, Michigan State, Penn State, all playing like rock solid defense and at least capable enough offense where they look like legitimate top 15 teams in the nation, where Ohio State's going to have to get through a lot of teams and they're not playing very well. Versus I know less about the Big 12 right now because I think there have been less meaningful games to know, okay, who can challenge Oklahoma? Of course, Iowa State was the preseason selection, but they've struggled. Who are those teams? Same thing in the ACC. While we've seen Clemson struggle, who's going to, North Carolina State went to Mississippi State and got whipped. Miami's not looking good. Like any candidate that could challenge Clemson because they're struggling, they're also struggling as well. North Carolina's already dropped a game. So I do see where we go into conference play in a very precarious situation in a good way. I love the chaos. I love the uncertainty and the unpredictability that we think we have. But again, I would not be surprised if at least in 1 or 2 of those 3 conferences that the norm didn't come back into play once we get into conference play.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that, Mark. And we've talked a lot about this. Would this be the year that we have maybe a little bit more chaos, so to speak, in some of these conferences? And I think it seems to be, at least early on. To your point, there's not been a lot of conference games that have been played, but I think early on, the parity is kind of speaking for itself. I think we talked a little bit offline. I think there's been 19 ranked teams that have lost in the first 3 weeks. So when you look at some of these teams, Oklahoma looks beatable, Ohio State looks beatable, Clemson looks beatable. Alabama even came back to earth on Saturday, and you talked about the strength of the Big Ten is much better than what it was a year ago. Remains to be seen about the Big 12. You had mentioned it exactly, that Iowa State looks a little iffy. Oklahoma State's maybe not as strong. Texas, same way, a little bit inconsistent as well. So I think that'll be interesting. I think you'd mentioned NC State. I think if someone's gonna get Clemson, I think there's a chance it could be this weekend. They're gonna get that thing figured out at some point, right? I mean, they're like Oklahoma. They've got way too much talent on that offensive side of the ball to struggle. I was shocked at the 14 points, but they're against who did they play Saturday? Georgia
Tech.
Yeah.
Yep.
14 points against one of the worst teams in the ACC. So I think they're in big time upset alert, I would think, on Saturday. However, I think they're going to get some more confidence as the season goes on. But I think the glaring thing for me, Mark, watching Clemson play is how bad or inexperienced, however you want to say it, is their offensive line so far is really hurting them. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's fun to watch, at least for me, obviously, just being an overall college football fan, but watching the amount of parity that we have in a lot of these ranked teams are, are going down. Even Cincinnati, they struggled for a while. They ended up pulling away from Indiana, but there's just, I don't know if it's the extra COVID year for some of these kids and these teams, but the parity is much stronger than what it has been in the past.
7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central on ABC. Oklahoma, 4th ranked in the country, hosting West Virginia. We got Travis Kenobi. He's going to join the show for the last 15 minutes or so from Last Word on College Football to help us break down the Mountaineers side. Hey, Travis, how are we doing today?
Good, Mark. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you being here.
Happy to be here.
All right, this West Virginia football team, I gave much accolades to during the offseason for scheduling 2 Power 5 opponents. I love that. So they went on the road to take on Maryland. They came back and took on Virginia Tech in what a lot of people don't understand is a old rivalry from the past, and were able to fend off Virginia Tech inside the 5-yard line to preserve a 27-21 win. So what are your initial thoughts about West Virginia's season through 3 games and 2 meaningful games against quality opponents?
Yeah, Mark, I think that, West Virginia is still struggling a bit to find its identity offensively. Its offensive line has been a little worse than we expected it to be so far, but defensively, I think it is finding its sea legs, and that goal line stand at the end of the game against Virginia Tech was sort of proof that I think our defense is not quite as good as last year, but it's getting there.
As you look at this matchup against Oklahoma, what are your major concerns out of the gate?
Well, my major concern is the same one I had preseason, is that, Oklahoma, though they've, like many teams across the country, as you were talking about with the aforesaid chaos, it looks like they're still struggling to put their identity together as well. But they still look like a very good team, both offensively and defensively. So I think it's going to be a struggle. I do think that the spread on this game is probably a little too high. I think the last I checked, it was 16.5 points. I don't know that this game is going to be a barn burner, because Oklahoma's offense looked like it struggled against Nebraska last week, and West Virginia's offense, except against LIU, has not been able to put up more than 27 points in a game.
Yeah, it's not going to quite be that Will Greer, who would it have been at the time, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield shootout in Baker Mayfield probably in 2015 for the Big 12 championship, that 58-56 game or whatever it was.
Yeah, that was Greer and Kyler Murray, and that was a heck of a treat for both teams' fan bases in college football. But this isn't going to be that kind of game, I don't think.
Jason, anything for Travis in regards to the matchup?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with Travis. It's hard for me to imagine even a situation where both of these teams get in the 30s. I think both of these teams are playing really well defensively. I think, at this point, West Virginia's held their opponents to less than 3 yards per carry in running the football. So, and those of you that have watched Oklahoma and cover Oklahoma and seen Oklahoma through the years, Oklahoma's at its best when it's able to run the football. Now, they did run, for their offensive struggles, they did run the ball pretty well against Nebraska. I think around 180, 190 yards, 5.5 yards per carry. So you like what Oklahoma was able to do on the ground. However, they haven't had that consistency in the ground and the air, to Travis's point, really finding what that identity looks like for both teams. So yeah, I see, a game with the winning team probably is in the upper 20s, and a lot of, for a contrast maybe in this game that we haven't seen in a while, that both teams have really good defenses coming into this game.
Travis, anything you've got for Jason on the matchup?
Well, it's interesting because I still remember very well, the Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Jalen Hurts years. And, that's when Lincoln Riley first became coordinator and head coach. And, Oklahoma was averaging, for 2 or 3 straight seasons, more than 10 yards per offensive play. And they don't look like they're nearly as high this year. Is that sort of accurate, Jason? Is that what we're looking at? Maybe a 7 to 8 yard per play Oklahoma team?
Yeah, no, Travis, I think that's fair. I think there's a lot of a commentary that I think we'll see how it manifests itself throughout the remainder of the year. But there's a lot of thoughts on how Spencer Rattler has played through the first couple of games this year. Maybe he's not quite on the same level as a Baker Mayfield, as a Kyler Murray, even as a Jalen Hurts. So I think he has an opportunity to improve. I think Oklahoma's got a little bit to go from an offensive line perspective. They're decent in the pass game, but they've not really been as strong in the run blocking game as they have in the past. I think a lot of the running, the yardage, and what Oklahoma's been able to get has really been from really good individual plays by Kennedy Brooks and Eric Gray. So I think those two things are really a big factor, and they don't have a CD Lamb out there from a wide receiver perspective as well. They've got a lot of good players, but I don't think they have a superstar guy that can really take over a game right now.
Travis, what were you expecting out of this West Virginia team this season?
Well, I was hoping that we would sort of cruise into this game 3-0. The Maryland game was tough. I mean, we turned the ball over 4 times and didn't force any takeaways, and we still just barely lost 30-24. So it could have gone the other way, but I expected a slightly better offensive line and run game than we've put on the board to date. But, other than that, it's pretty much the team that I thought it would. Neil Brown wants to have low-scoring defensive affairs, and so far that's what we've done in our 2 Power 5 games.
We've got very few quality games to measure these teams, and like I said off the top, Travis, West Virginia being one of the few that we've got 2 to go on, and I know Virginia Tech really put the clamps on Sam Howell and that North Carolina running game to the tune of only 10 points given up. Letty Brown, on the other hand, in the West Virginia offensive line, 8.5 yards per carry against the Hokies, 19 carries for 161. So I got to think that they're at least going to test the Oklahoma front to see if they can have similar production.
Yeah, I think they're going to do that. And the other thing that you have to look for with West Virginia's offense now is that Coach Brown is more willing to mix his 2 quarterbacks. He's got Jarrett Dagey, who's a true pocket passer. And then he has young Garrett Green, who is sort of a run-first, run-pass option quarterback. And Coach Brown is committed to rotating those 2 quarterbacks through the rest of the season. So it'll give a slightly different look for Oklahoma and any other opponent this season to defend, which will help open up the run game.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Travis. And I think just thinking about this, a couple of keys that I think about going in is Oklahoma's defense from a front 4 perspective. Really the strength of the team. I think overall their ability to handle Letty Brown, I think, is going to be big. They've been pretty strong thus far, only about 2.5 yards per carry against Nebraska, and they handled Adrian Martinez pretty well, kept him in the pocket. I think he had 20 or 30 yards rushing for the game. Oklahoma deployed a little bit of a spy type of defense from time to time. So I think that's going to be really critical for Oklahoma in this game as well. And I think, to your point, Travis, I think West Virginia wants to limit the possessions, make this a a game that goes super, super fast and then get them into the fourth quarter and certainly see what happens. Oklahoma experienced one of those games this past week against Nebraska where the possessions were really limited. So I think Oklahoma wants to, obviously not necessarily get in a track meet, but I think Oklahoma wants to be in a position where they're able to get a little bit more possessions. And I think there's probably a lot of desire that they know that they left a lot of meat on the bone against Nebraska and be able to clean that up a little bit more this Saturday.
West Virginia. Yeah, go ahead, Travis.
I was just going to say, I hope that Graham doesn't pull another one of those interceptions against us like he did last week. That was one of the most impressive interceptions I've ever seen.
Well, if he does, you want him to do it on 4th and 18.
That's right. Well, I think, it's an interesting conversation because I've seen so many people talk about, it was 4th and 18. He intercepted the ball inside the 5-yard line. He should have dropped that. If you're a kid in the heat of the moment, especially a defensive back, when you have an opportunity for an interception, you're never gonna give that up. Never going to give that opportunity up.
Yeah, we could debate all day on whether there's no question that the debate is one mathematically that he should have not caught the football. That's obvious that if he doesn't catch the football, Oklahoma gets the ball at the spot of the 4th down play rather than inside the 5-yard line. But to Jason's point, number one, these guys are just playing football. They are responding, reacting in a split second. And that's what you do. And a defensive back in college football, what do these guys typically get? 1, 2, 3 interceptions a season? A very, very rare opportunity. And then he makes a play of a lifetime on the football. And who knows, maybe that fired up his team and excited his teammates and himself enough to make up for the 20 yards lost or more. So, yeah, I can see both sides of it. Yes, technically, the rest of us get to sit and analyze the play, 3 minutes later, 5 minutes later, 3 days later, rather than making a split-second judgment. And I would never fault him in any way for making that interception.
No, you're absolutely right, Mark. And I think, especially, the thing that Alex Grinch has preached since he's been here at Oklahoma is turnover. So anytime they have an opportunity to turn the ball over, they'll obviously try to take advantage of that. And yeah, I mean, granted, it didn't work out in Oklahoma's favor specifically because they went 3 and out, and then Nebraska went down and scored their 16th point there. But that's obviously not on him. So yeah, no, I think and that's the one thing that we've talked about here, and Travis, before you got on, is really consistency. And I think that's what Oklahoma's been struggling with overall. Yes, the identity thing is a very good point, but I think also the consistency. They'll make flashes, on the offensive side of the ball, even in the secondary as well, where Oklahoma will make flashes. Case in point, this play, this interception. DJ Graham got on the previous play, he got beat on a go route down the sidelines for a pretty big, a big chunk play. And then the very next play, he comes back and makes that insane interception. So in order to Oklahoma to get where they want to get and where they need to get this year, they've got to have those plays be much more consistently.
Travis, real quick, because it would be optimal for me to rewind the clock about 5 minutes because I got to jump on another live stream in 2 minutes. But I see that West Virginia picked up 6 sacks against Virginia Tech and Braxton Burmeister on Saturday. Jared Bartlett had 3. Any quick thumbnails, profiles on particular players on both sides of the ball that we need to look out for, Oklahoma fans in particular that are watching the game, in terms of who those impact players could be?
Yeah, I think, our wide receivers are playing a lot better this year than they did last. In fact, one of the biggest takeaways from that game is that our wide receivers had 0 drops against Virginia Tech, and it's been a while since I could say that as a follower of West Virginia sports. I think, you probably look, Sam James is actually having a pretty good season. Winston Wright is having a very good season. He's very dangerous in the kick return game, so you might see him. He's currently averaging over 44 yards per kick return. So you're either going to see Oklahoma kick the ball away from him, or you're going to see him develop a big return. I look for Jared Bartlett to continue some of his momentum, playing out of that bandit position and getting those 3 sacks. And then you also look at Akeem Messidor and Dante Stills.
All right, Travis. Appreciate you stopping by. That's Travis Kenobi, covers West Virginia football for Last Word on College Football, as does Jason Ray. Oklahoma in the Big 12 on Last Word on College Football. This, of course, our Oklahoma show that we deliver for you each and every Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. Central. Please be here next week as we break it down on the Sooners in the Big 12. Guys, appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.